Today's class is Beyond the Playing Field, Sport, Character, and Faith. An age-old question in the study of sport is, does it build character? After Chad Carlson spent almost 2 decades studying sport, his interest in this question has turned epistemological. What can we know about whether sports build character? Carlson will deconstruct the conventional wisdom about sports and character and then consider whether, and if so, how, authentic character building in sports might relate to an athlete's or coach's personal religious life and values. Now, talking with a few of you as you came, you probably know Chad better than I do. Some said they knew you when you were a teenager, Chad. But he graduated from Hope in '03, and then he started as a professor here in 2014, and he also coached for about 7 years. He is a professor of kinesiology and the director of general education. He is also the co-founder and co-director of Sports Faith Life. And if you go to that website, he also does a podcast with his colleague on that. And I think they do it twice a month, something. So if you want to listen to him after listening to him today. He's also the director of the Character Hub, a new initiative on campus. It's a 3-year program that they received a $700,000 grant, and he can speak more to that than I can. Before coming to Hope, he was a professor in the kinesiology department at Illinois University. He was also the 2024 Hope Outstanding Professor Educator Award, so that would have been last spring. And he is the co-director of the Second Global Congress on Sport and Christianity in 2019 and continues to serve as an organizer of the Global Congress on Sports and Christianity. We've already talked about his areas of expertise. He does have an undergraduate degree from Hope. He got his master's at Western Michigan and a PhD in kinesiology and the history philosophy of sports program at Penn State. Go Nittany Lions. Honor, grants, and awards, spring 2020, visiting fellow at the Van Walt Institute, Christian Reformed Church of North America Ignite Ministry Startup Grant, co-director of 2019 Global Congress on Sports and Christianity, Calvin University Center for Christian Scholarship, recipient of a Mellon Foundation Grant Challenge. He has various publications that are listed. He also published a book in 2017 about making March Madness. It's about the history of not just college basketball, but the tournament. So if you're interested in that, I've read it, and I'm a kind of a March Madness junkie, so I highly recommend it. And before he rose in the academic ranks, he was quite a basketball player at Hope College, played 4 seasons, 1999, 2000 through 2002, 2003. 2002, he was MIAA first team. In 2001, MIAA second team. He was the captain in 01 and 02 and 02 and 03. And he played, he's number 13, tied with 2 others for a number of games played, 110. And he's still in the top 25 in various offensive, defensive, and rebounding categories. Most noted, 3-point shooting percentage of 40%. That was number 12. And he was tied with someone else for 3-point attempts at number 5 and for most 3-point field goals made. So now we got a full understanding of who Chad is. So I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks to all of you for having me here. It's great to be with you today, end of the semester. Can you hear me all right? This is okay? All right. You know, what we do at Hope is at the end of the semester at the cafeteria, they kind of just throw the scraps together, whatever's left. And is that the way that this operates here? Like, I'm sort of at the end here, and you just kind of throw together whatever's here. Well, Fred Johnson is next week, right? So yes, Fred is excellent. If I'm near the same time as him, I'm feeling okay, Mark. Yeah, thanks. All right, so great to be with you all here today, and I get to talk about the confluence of 3 topics that are really important to me that I've spent a lot of time with, and so I want to talk about those here as we move along. Here's what we'll get through. I want to offer a little bit of rationale for why this topic. I want to offer a little bit of context and background for where we are today, what helps us to understand the current situation related to sport, character, Christianity. I'll share a little about what Christianity or what character is, at least according to those of us that are doing work at the Character Hub on Hope's campus recently. And then we'll ask the question, does sport build character? And we'll unpack that a little bit related to some research in the social sciences, some research in philosophy, summarize some of those things, and then help us understand what role Christianity might play in how we engage in sport from a character perspective and what we might look for. So we'll end by talking about some strategies, some things that we're using even beyond sport, but that work within the world of sport, that work within Christian faith, and that work within the world of education. So broad applications for strategies. So why sport? Most of what I do involves sport. I'll say that. I think just about every one of my classes that I teach has the word sport in the title, and that tends to attract a certain type of student, and I appreciate that. We just, as of August, this past fall, started a sports studies minor academic program on campus. We've never had that before on Hope's campus, and it took me about 10 years to get the program proposal in a place where I thought it was worthwhile to share with the faculty, and it was approved unanimously. It's been a very popular program among students. We've got the equivalent of like one student declaring per week since it started, so we feel really good about the interest in that program. Interestingly, I pitched this program as being important to Hope because we have so many more female students than male students on campus, and I thought, well, this might be another way of attracting male students. Historically, sports has been male-dominated, male-centered, male-identified, and so I thought that would be helpful. But wouldn't you know it, our first 5 declared minors were females, and more than 60% of the students in our program are females. So it actually very much mirrors the Hope College demographic for students overall. So this is a program that is unique because it's a liberal arts program. If you're familiar with the landscapes in higher education, sports management programs are proliferating. More and more schools all the time have sport management programs. Sport management is a business-oriented program geared towards the sport industry. This program has a few business principles, but it's really meant to be a liberal arts program. So it's meant to be a program where we're asking big questions, using sport as a vehicle to help us ask big questions from a number of different disciplinary perspectives, seeking answers, engaging in critical thinking, and helping to cultivate who we are as students within the program. So that's a new thing for us. That's something that I oversee, and that's very central to my heart at this point in time. So when we talk about sports, that's what's on my radar at the moment. It's thinking about the sports studies program within our kinesiology department. So why character? Mark mentioned that I'm the director of the Character Hub on campus. This is what's meant to be the sustainable piece of a 3-year grant that we're calling Character Forward that we received from Wake Forest, from their Educating Character Initiative. So what we try to do at the Character Hub and begin doing over the next 3 years is to coordinate and connect existing efforts towards character development, character education, those things that happen in the curriculum and those things that happen outside the curriculum. And we're working to accelerate and catalyze new character development, character education efforts. So this is important across campus because we want our students going out and getting jobs. Of course, that's important, what they do, but we also want to be able to focus on who they are and who they're becoming. And so efforts towards character development and character education are really important to us. Hope has done stuff since its founding related to character education, and that's been very important to create good, strong citizens. And so we'll do that through the curriculum. We've already offered some research grants for faculty on campus who are participating in research related to character education, character development. And we are in the process of unveiling our call for proposals for faculty that want to teach classes related to character education, or build some content into their current classes related to character education, character development. So that's an important thing we have going on campus. This is an important wave coming through higher education, thinking about developing students as full, holistic, well-rounded people of good, strong character. That's important to us, who will go out and be leaders in society, whatever subsets and niches of the society that they choose to be a part of. So we're engaging in this work. We're really excited about it. This is a grant for 3 years, but again, it's sustainable beyond that. So a lot of what's been on my radar over the last 6 months has been related to character education, character development. And the third thing is that we're talking about the Christian faith. I have a picture here of what we have going on this summer, the Congress at Baylor University's Truett Seminary, hosted by their Faith and Sports Institute. The director of that institute and myself and a colleague from Calvin and one other person are directing this, and so I'm serving as conference chair. And this is the fourth instantiation of the Global Congress on Sport and Christianity. We've had them every 3 years since 2016. In 2019, Hope and Calvin co-hosted the second one. It had to be in Grand Rapids, of course. They're closer to the airport, so we let them host it, but it was co-led by Hope and Calvin. We had a wonderful turnout there, 200 some people from all over the globe, more than 25 countries. It'll be a little bit bigger here in Baylor this time, but pretty well represented around the globe. This is an event, it's a gathering that it has a little bit of a feel of an academic conference, but we're not calling it that. It's a Congress because there's also a lot of practitioners there, a lot of people that attend that are not faculty members and don't do research, practitioners, that meaning chaplains, ministry leaders. There's a lot of administrators and teachers within K-12 education, higher education, people from all sorts of sectors of the industry that are just interested in the intersection of sport and Christianity. So that's occurring this summer, and that is driven by and sort of the conversations ensue between the events through the podcast that my colleague at Calvin and I run called Sport, Faith, Life. So those are the three things that are helping hopefully contextualize for you why I'm interested in this particular topic and what I'll be talking about. You might recognize this picture. I walk into the upstairs lobby of DeVos Fieldhouse every day, and I walk past this montage of pictures that has a quote at the top. Sports do not build character, they reveal it. This is what we're getting at today. This is what we're going to talk about, because this is what we might call a shallow sports claim, right? So some sort of phrase that we say a lot in the world of sport, but we don't think deeply about whether it's actually true or not. That's what we're hoping to unpack today. But the reason why I show this picture is because I think it's really helpful to understand the history of the Hope College Athletic Department, of which I'm a part at the moment, not officially any part, except I share office space in a building with the Hope College Athletic Department. But there's a little bit of history that helps us understand why this quote is on the wall in DeVos Fieldhouse. And it has to do with the larger quote on the right. That's from Grantland Rice, who's probably the most famous sports writer of the first half of the 20th century, who in 1908 wrote these words: "When the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he writes not that you won or lost, but how you played the game." Sport and character, sport and behavior, sport and virtue, virtuous action. And actually, the history of the early years of Hope College athletics, written by Gordon Brewer, former athletic director, former track and field coach, former faculty member at Hope, is written with the title, "But How You Played the Game." So there's a deep connection in DeVos Fieldhouse, the history of DeVos Fieldhouse, between those who ran or were in leadership positions related to the Hope College Athletic Department and connecting sport and character. That's really important. I'm not sure why they chose the quote they did to put up over top of those pictures, but there's always been an interest from the coaches and the athletic directors on Hope College's campus thinking about sport and character, meaning we're not going to sell out to win if it means selling our souls. We want to win, sure we do. We want to win a lot, but we also want to do so in the context of Christian faith and our adherence to particular moral characteristics. So here's our question for today. Does sport build character? What do we say and do? And why do we think the way that we do related to sport and character? Well, let's start by talking about what we mean by character. So I'm offering a little bit of context here. There'll be some slides that have a lot of words. I'm going to try to give some time for you to read those as I'm talking, and sometimes I'll read these words. I hope you're okay with that. We're working on the Hope College Character Hub, which is, again, a new entity as of a couple months ago. We're working on having a definition itself. When you get a bunch of faculty in a room together, they want to define everything, and so we've been working on that to try to come up with a definition that's operational, that helps us to understand what it is we're talking about when we're talking about character. So it's a collection of stable, deep, and enduring dispositions that define who we are and shape how we characteristically think, feel, and act. Again, when it comes to character, our actions are important, our thoughts are important, and our judgments are important. And it's composed of virtues and vices. So often when we talk about character, we say this is a person of character. What we mean is it's a person of good character. But what I want to talk about here is the fact that there are virtues and vices that make up our character. So there's some good and some bad, I would say, when we're talking about character. But so often, and I fall prey to this too, we get a little bit lazy in language, and instead of saying a person of good character, we just say a person of character, assuming that it would be mostly good. We talk in those terms sometimes. Virtues and vices make up our character, and so on the on the right, a classical definition of virtue, which I think is really helpful for us, especially as we're thinking about sports. Virtue is the excellence that makes anything an outstanding specimen of its kind, especially well fitted to its ends. When applied to human beings, the word has no necessary moral implications, though it carries them conventionally. So we think about virtue usually in terms of morality, right? That you would have virtues, courage, justice, prudence, those types of things are virtues that you would have. And those are moral characteristics or moral virtues. But there's also an understanding that virtue is serving in an excellent way that thing that you're supposed to be or that thing that you're supposed to do. So I talk to my students about virtue as being both of these things, that we want you being disciplined people. We want you being loving, faithful, hopeful people. Those are the moral characteristics, moral virtues. But we also want you to be excellent students, excellent, an outstanding specimen. So what does an excellent student do? An excellent student goes to class, studies, pays attention in class, completes their assignments, acts in congenial ways towards their faculty members and their fellow students. This is what makes an excellent student. And that's virtuous as well, even if we're not identifying particular moral characteristics within that description of what a virtuous student is. So does that make some sense? Okay, so we're talking about virtue. There's the moral and the non-moral, and we're talking about character. That's inclusive of our virtues and our vices as well. So let's offer some context to the intersection of sport, character, and the Christian faith. I've got a few characteristics here that would help us understand a little bit about the origins of modern sport in the United States. When I say that, modern sport, what I mean is the times that we officially formed rule books, rules for sports and leagues and teams, and it was more than just kids getting together in a playground and coming up with a particular game that they were playing. That we actually have, so modern sport is characterized by the fact that we have rules and rule books and we have bureaucracies and we understand what we're talking about when we say baseball. Whereas before the middle of the 19th century, we might not have had any idea, even though maybe one group played this game over here, one group played this game on the other part of the globe, whatever. So modern sport really came together for most of the sports that are most popular for us today in the last couple decades of the 19th century. And that's important because there were a few social factors that baked in particular social fabrics to sport. So I have the words muscular Christianity up there. This was a bit of a movement, the latter decades of the 19th century, the first couple decades of the 20th century, in which we see this connection between the church and sport. The idea is that before that, there was a generation or so within the 19th century where the church was seen as too effeminate, and that was seen as a bad thing. Fewer and fewer men were sitting in the pews of church during church services. What was the problem? Why didn't they go there? Well, part of it was maybe they didn't feel like there was something for them. What's in it for me, for a man? What helps me grow in my virility, right? My ability to show manliness in culture. Jesus being presented more as a lamb than a lion. So there was the effeminization of the church. There was industrialization where men were spending less time vigorously, strenuously at work for their jobs as they had been in an agricultural society. So the jobs are different. It's requiring less strenuous work of them. And then the third thing is that more people are moving to cities, and it's much easier to complete certain things that you want to within society that falls amidst a growing number of trappings, moral trappings. All of these things came to play, and what resulted is the emergence of formal, organized sport and physical activities in order to try to put at bay those problems that were creeping into society. And so the YMCA becomes very popular during this period of time because we have young men who don't see themselves as part of the church, who don't have to work on the farm all day, every day, and who are amidst more urban societies where there's opportunities for them to do bad things. The YMCA steps in and says, come to our place. And they started by the YMCA actually just started as just like a literary society, trying to bring young men in, keep them away from gambling, away from the saloons, away from the brothels, bring them in for literary clubs. And that didn't really capture their attentions. And so they start offering gymnasium activities. And that turns into sports. And that seems to captivate them. And that brings them in. Churches think about embracing these new physical activities: basketball, volleyball, soccer, American football, rugby, cricket, baseball. Some of our most popular sports today emerged in their modern form during this time period, and churches for a time embraced those because it brought men back into the church. And when we look at Great Britain, which would have been the sort of the originators of this muscular Christian movement, part of why they valued sport and character and Christianity is because they came to believe, and they used the phrases to speak to the fact that young men became leaders from the playing fields, that it wasn't what they were taught in their elite public schools that made them the leaders that they were able to conquer the world through Great Britain's colonialist ventures. It was on the playing fields. That's where they learned it. It's by playing rugby, by playing cricket, by having to lead your peers, by having to follow rules, but still try to outdo another group. That's how you learn to be a leader. And all of this within Christian societies. So that's the backdrop from history. Here's a bit of modern context as well. If we have this muscular Christian period that cared about the character of sport, character of those playing sport, and what happened within a Christian context, the great sporting myth today says that the widespread belief that sport participation inherently leads to positive personal and social development. This is the great sporting myth. And the belief that sport is automatically a force for good. This is the carryover, the residue from the original time period from when modern sport came to be in the U.S., that throughout all this time, character has been baked in. The idea is that sport is a vehicle for good. This is how it's always been. This is the basis for it. Of course, if you go to sporting events today, you might question that, and that's exactly what's going on here. So sociologist Jay Coakley actually has come up with this phrase, the great sporting myth. It's the idea that we at face value believe that sport is good because we've always kind of believed that. It's always had character undertones. It's always had Christian undertones to it. And the reason why sociologists talk about the great sporting myth is because they want us to think more critically about what goes on when we participate in sport. What goes on individually for those who participate and those who watch and those who consume in other ways, and what goes on socially. What does sport perpetuate? How does sport change the characteristics of our societies? So that's all context. Well, let's think about now a specific scholarly research and how that can help us understand sport and character. Again, the question is, does sport build character? So I want to begin by looking at some social science research. I'm going to share some facts with you here, all based on research. 9 out of 10 in a 2024 study, this was done at Ohio State, 9 of 10 Americans agreed that sports build character and improved one's health. 84% agreed that it makes one popular in school. 85% said it makes one well-known in the community, and 67% believed it leads to better grades. If this is the belief, that so many Americans have, you can see why sociologists have a problem with this, the great sporting myth. This is the myth. This is what we tell ourselves about sport. And clearly people believe it. 9 out of 10, 9 out of every 10 people. And it's not just Ohio State folks. You believe it. That's right. That's right. That's right. We got two Ohio State people here at least. That's okay. We didn't record that, did we? No. Okay. Okay. So this seems to be part of sort of the current belief structure that we have here. Even though when I was telling you the great sporting myth, you're looking at me, a number of you are saying that's just not the way sport is today, right? We know there's a lot of bad in sport, a lot of bad behavior, a lot of bad that comes from that, right? Violence, maybe less egregious behaviors that we would consider to be characteristically bad. And yet we continue to tell ourselves that sport builds character and that sport improves us in a number of ways. Here's another finding from this 2024 study at Ohio State, a pretty groundbreaking study, really. Youth sport participation has been linked with better mental health in adulthood, but only for those who continue to play sports throughout childhood. This is how much sport matters. There were essentially 3 categories that came from sort of this part of the research. What they found is that those who had participated in youth sports throughout their childhood, the entire time, that is all the way through high school, that section of people interviewed had the highest levels of mental health, so positive health mentally as adults. The next highest group was those who had never participated in youth sports throughout childhood. And the lowest group, so all the adults in this study that were in the lowest category of mental health outcomes as an adult, were those who began participating in youth sport during childhood, but for some reason did not end their childhood playing sport. They were cut or excluded otherwise. They had bad experiences that led them to self-select out of youth sports. So we have the top best mental health is those who participated the entire time. Second best is those who never participated. And the lowest is those who opted out or were asked out or excluded from youth sport. That's how traumatic some of our bad experiences can be towards who we are in sport. This is an older study, but I just find the numbers to be interesting here. 40% of boys, 25% of girls see nothing wrong with using a stolen playbook sent by an anonymous supporter before a big game. I'm going to get cheers from the Ohio State guys again here. This is well before the Michigan sign stealing scandal. 30% of all boys and 20% of girls softball players think it's okay for a softball pitcher to deliberately throw at a batter who homered the last time up. 54% of male football players, 49% of male basketball players, and 18% of females in all sports approve of trash talking. Look at that top bullet point. 9 out of 10 Americans agreed that sports build character, improve one's health, and yet these are self-reported scores from young athletes who are actually in it, participating. Seems interesting to me. And I would guess that between 2006 and today, in the last 20 years, I don't know if these numbers would be getting better. And this study baffled me the first time that I heard these numbers. In 1998, a poll of 198 U.S. Olympians reported that more than half said that they would take a drug that would assure victory, even though it would kill them in 5 years. How interested we are in victory. That obviously drives a lot of the problems that we have in sport, right? Our interest in, our need for victory. And this study shows it as clear as any other. A little bit more research. A couple of studies that were done in the latter decades of the 20th century. More than 100 male and female intercollegiate basketball players were interviewed, and they scored lower on moral judgment questions than the reported college norms. That is, their non-athlete peers. These college basketball players, supposed to be emblematic of maybe all college basketball players, I was one of them, scored lower than their peers. Okay? Is there something wrong with basketball, we might ask ourselves? This is why we'd have another study. More basketball players scored significantly less. They had less mature moral reasoning scores than their peers. However, the 20 college swimmers in this particular study had no statistically significant differences than their non-athlete peers. Did I choose the wrong sport if I want to be a good person? That's right. There's no contact in swimming, right? Wait, we'll actually get to that, Nori. Yeah. Team sport athletes, you can see how these studies a decade later followed up on the others. Team sport athletes had significantly lower moral judgment scores than non-athletes or individual sport athletes. And we've seen this in a number of psychological or educational research-based studies that talk about this exact thing. There's a difference between how team sport athletes score and how individual sport athletes score. And individual sport athletes generally score at about the same levels of maturity as their non-athlete peers, whereas team sport athletes generally score lower when it comes to moral reasoning questions and surveys. And then U.S. Military Academy. The cadets showed a negative impact on moral judgment from team sport participation, further corroborating what we just talked about. Boys who participated in high contact sports, this is what Nori's getting at, and girls who participated in medium contact sports in high school were significantly less mature in distributive justice reasoning. Something about, or there might be, this is what we're questioning here, there might be something about the nature of contact sports where you're sharing space and you're physically contacting others that might lead someone to provide less of the benefit of the doubt to their opponents, to their opponents, as opposed to individual sports, many of which are less contact, but also team sports that are less contact. There wasn't quite the statistical difference or the significance of the difference. A recent study of 2,000 first-year college student athletes across colleges that are part of the NAIA, which is the other college athletic association body than the NCAA. The NAIA, Cornerstone and Aquinas, are both NAIA schools locally, investigated what predicted a student athlete's moral integrity and their sense of purpose. So they offered opportunities for student athletes to identify how they saw competition, either as war or as partnership. Their findings: the partnership orientation was a significant predictor of higher levels of sportsmanship and empathy among athletes. Again, seeing competition as partnership, we have to agree on the rules, we have to agree on the venue, we have to agree on the space and the time and all of this stuff. The partnership orientation, significantly more aligned with integrity, honesty, and following the rules. The partnership orientation predicted who intentionally sought a positive purpose or had found their purpose. That is, it seems to reason that those who saw competition as partnership were living better lives, were living more meaningful lives, or lives of greater purpose. That's yes. The question is, if you want, do you want to?
Yes.
So the question is, are there studies that relate to the coaching staff? Not that I'm aware of, that would give any kind of sort of statistical significance here in this way. It speaks to this question. Your question is a really good one, and I want to talk about that exact thing a little bit later on. Yeah, thanks. So what does this mean, other than the fact that we need to ask more questions and better questions about all of this to see if there are connections? This means that moral reasoning is situational, depending on the group or the context. I have a quote here from Kohlberg, who actually studied this in prison settings and said this: the moral atmosphere might actually pull those who have higher or more mature moral reasoning abilities, down because of the constraints of the particular moral atmosphere, that it might inhibit one's ability to show greater levels of moral reasoning. In the prison system, this seems to have been at play, at least when this work was done throughout the latter stages of the 20th century. And you see how we might translate that to sport. If we're in a team setting, there might be a morally constraining atmosphere, whether it comes from the coach or somebody else. There might be some constraints there that would actually reduce the moral reasoning scores of the athletes on those teams. And it may be simple peer pressure, who knows? It may be the othering of the opponents because of the physical contact or whatever else. It might be different in individual sports. But the moral atmosphere matters. Moral reasoning in sport is seen as separate from that which is normal life. Across different groups where we saw statistically significant differences in the earlier questions that we talked about, so athletes and non-athletes, swimmers and basketball players, college students and high school students, males and females, many of them saw life dilemmas as different, or their scores for moral reasoning were different when it came to life dilemmas than it was for sport dilemmas. That is, for a lot of students, young people, they see it different. Sport is in its own separate sphere. And for life, they might have higher or normal moral reasoning scores. And in sport, they might have lower moral reasoning scores. I wonder about, I showed you that bullet point that talked about how many boys and how many girls agreed that it would be okay for a softball pitcher to throw at a batter if the batter had homered last time up. I wonder if those same people would have the same types of moral reasoning intuitions if it was a life dilemma rather than a sport dilemma. So there might be something about the world of sport that breeds lower moral reasoning scores, more corruption, less good behavior, whatever we might call it. Moral reasoning and character development in sport is dependent on one's orientation toward competition. The last slide that I showed you talked a little bit about this. Is competition seen as war, at which point there would be less honor towards the opponent, towards the other? Or is it seen as a partnership in which we have to work together in order to make this thing go? Part of what we get when we sign up for sports conferences, for instance, Hope and Calvin, we can talk about ourselves as being at war, but we're in a conference together where we have to follow the same rules. We have to agree that we're going to play each other once or twice every season in every sport. There's a partnership there, whether we want to allow that to be prominent in our minds or not. And every team that is part of a conference, you are agreeing to a partnership. That's part of why we do it. And there's some good that comes out of that. But I think it's helpful for us to understand the difference in reported moral reasoning scores from young athletes based on whether they see competition as war or competition as partnership. And that's helpful for us as we think about character within sport. What can philosophy do to help? So at Hope, I'm in the division of social sciences, but I don't really do social science research. That's psychology, sociology, political science. I actually do, this is why I'm here today. This is the humanities session. I do history and philosophy. So I'm going to offer some thoughts on how philosophers, specifically sport philosophers, might help us think about all of this and make some sense of this question and these findings. So philosophers help us by asking epistemological questions. That's a philosophy word, like how we know things, the theories of knowledge. How do we know that sport builds or inhibits character development? How do we know? Those are questions that we ask. Here's a question that isn't owned by philosophers, but a lot of times when we see the research that we saw on the previous slides, a philosopher would ask this question. And it gets at the ends of all this. What's the cause? Is it the fact that basketball actually causes young people to have lower moral reasoning skills? Or is it the fact that there's something about basketball that is attractive to or allures those who maybe have lower moral reasoning abilities? Or is it a combination of things? So do we know that basketball is the culprit of lower moral reasoning scores? Or might it be a coach? Or might it be a particularly large number of poor moral atmospheres. I spend a lot of time at basketball tournaments now that my kids play, and I can say, yeah, there's some moral atmospheres that maybe aren't super healthy. And I contrast that to my son who runs cross country. And I don't see that same problematic moral atmosphere. I've never seen it in cross country yet. So maybe there's something about the atmospheres. But is basketball to blame for that? Or is it individuals that have been the administrators for basketball or whatever else? I don't know if we know the answer to that, but it's a question that we should be asking. What's the causation here? And is it basketball that causes poor moral behavior? I'll tell you this. The guy that created basketball, James Naismith is his name, created it in 1891, couldn't have cared less about winning or losing in the sport of basketball. He created it as a sport for young Christian men to build their Christian character. He didn't care about winning or losing. He thought it developed teamwork and discipline, and that was important about the game of basketball. In fact, he went on to become the first basketball coach at Kansas University. He is, to date, the only basketball coach at Kansas University to end his career there with a losing record. The guy that created the game of basketball. Further, when he traveled on the road with his teams, he served as the referee, and his team still lost more games than they won. He clearly didn't care about winning and losing, right? This is about character development. So basketball was created to be a sport that developed character. Unfortunately, now what we're seeing 100, 120 years later is that basketball players often score lower on moral judgment tests than people in other athletes and than non-athletes. But what's to blame? Is it basketball? I don't know that we can pinpoint the sport itself as being to blame, right? Another question that philosophers ask has to do with agency. This is essentially the Tiger Woods question. If so many people see sport as being in a separate sphere, what do we actually know about the morality or the character of those who participate in sport if they see sport as different from the rest of life? So throughout much of Tiger Woods' career, he would have been identified as an especially disciplined person until we learn that he wasn't. Right, and so is sport separate from how we are as people outside of sport? So a question that philosophers might ask has to do with our agency. In what ways are we actually virtuous or vicious, right? In what ways are we actually like that? And in what settings does it come out? Do our virtues and our vices come out? And what does that mean about who we are as individuals? Philosophers also help by offering some normative and some metaphysical theories on empirical research. So I want to explain some of these things that I think are really helpful for us in our understanding of sport and character. The first is a definition of competition. What builds on some of the research that talked about the differences in life purpose, in honesty, integrity, and rule following between those who see competition as war and those who see competition as, what's the word I used? Partnership. Well, what if we were to describe competition across the board as a mutual quest for excellence through challenge? A mutual quest for excellence. Here's the idea. I can step into competition and I can want to beat you. And I can see it as you or me. One of us is going to win and one of us is not going to win. If I'm a competitor of character, I can show that virtue by stepping into the playing field or wherever else we are and saying, you know what? I want you to be at your best when I play against you, because if I beat you and you are at your best, that means more for me. I want you to be at your best, and I want to be able to do the same thing for you. I want to offer as good a challenge as I can provide to you. And that's going to make our sport experience the best. And for anyone else who's watching, it will be better if we are both at our best. This is it. I want to beat the other team when they are at their best. And that's important. I want to be at my best against them as well. And if I lose, but I know I was at my best. See how framing competition in that way might help us a little bit, might help us to understand what's good and what's not good and how we can develop our moral reasoning abilities by structuring sport in that way. How about thinking about potential outcomes in sport? And this is a little bit connected to our definition of competition. If we think about sport as just a zero-sum game, I think we're missing out on part of what can be really valuable about sport. Zero-sum meaning we have a contest between two teams, one wins and one loses, and that's just the way it's going to be. This is American sport for us, right? We have a winner and we have a loser, and that evens itself out. And I think when we do that, we miss so many other positive features that can potentially come to us through sport. I'm thinking about things like excellence. I can show excellence and still lose. I just might be terribly overmatched. I'm at a lot of those kinds of athletic contests as both my kids are playing, right? There's a lot of mismatching. You can play against a team that's a lot better than you and lose, but still show excellence. Maybe you did better than you did before. You can show improvement. It's an excellence that can come regardless of whether you win or lose. We want you to get better throughout the season. This was the difficulty for my daughter to understand this weekend. Her volleyball team lost all their matches. Did you improve? Were there things that you did that actually you got better at? That's important for us to think about those things. That helps us pull away from this winning as the only thing mindset. And then we can have enjoyment. Did you enjoy yourself? Even if you lost, you can still enjoy the experience. Boy, it was really satisfying. We played really hard. It was a great game. We lost. We could still have some kind of enjoyment there. And all of this is based on it's actually my dissertation advisor. His grandson goes to Hope now. This is great. I love it. I just met with him this morning. Talks about the difference between testing features and contesting features of sport. This is easier to see in individual sports than team sports. In an individual sport, you understand whether you won the race, for instance, or did not win the race. So that's a contest. Did you beat other runners, for instance, let's say in a sprint? That's the contest. But did you PR? Right? How well did you run? That's the test. Both of those things are going on at the same time in every race, in every individual, so running race, swimming race, whatever you have. In team sports, it's a little bit harder, but we can still call out some of the testing elements that can be so helpful that don't pay much reference to the opponent. And again, that's are we doing certain skills well? Are we carrying out the strategies that were going to give us the best chance of winning? There are certain things that we can do that can't be marked down as a win or a loss, but that could still be very positive. The testing elements. How well are we taking this test? And this translates to education very well also, because we can take a test well, but still not score the tops in the class. We can do things in a sporting event really well and still not win. There are testing features, and we ought to be able to help our athletes understand the value of those testing features, even in the midst of a loss, and sometimes even in the midst of a win. Sport philosophers have also spent a whole lot of time thinking about the ways in which we engage in sport. How do we participate in sport? And so these are just sort of ism words, it's philosophy words. I'm not going to get into them in detail, but we're thinking about how formalism or internalism is just like, I'm a good person. I behave well if I follow the rules of sport. But then the question becomes, could I ever act unvirtuously while following the rules of sport? So we in sport philosophy, we get into behavior issues and try to think about what is it that actually helps direct what's good behavior and what's not good behavior. All right. Here's the last one. The settings in which sport occurs matter. And we talked about this. I'll talk about this a little bit more too, but the reductionist thesis is this. The general ethical principles that prevail in sport can be reduced to the general social principles that prevail in the society or the context in which that sport occurs. This is a reductionist thesis, that we reduce the values in sport, the character in sport, to the value systems or the character that are prioritized in the particular context, the society in which the sport occurs. It's the difference between, for instance, American football in which if you can't quantify it, it doesn't really matter. We need to quantify everything and we need to win. There are no ties. And for instance, soccer in Brazil, which is called the beautiful game. Yeah, winning matters, but it's really about the dance and the rhythm, right, of the ball and the player. It's beautiful. It's about aesthetics. We don't value that as much in American football, for instance. So some philosophers have said to us, there's a reductionist thesis at play here, that sometimes we only understand the character of sport, how to behave in sport, based on the values that are important, that are priorities in the context in which the sport occurs. Does that make some sense? We don't care for cricket. Cricket's too slow for Americans, too long. There's not enough action, right? We want action because we're Americans and we want winning, furthermore. So there are particular value systems that are driven by the cultures in which the sports reside. Now, that's important for us because if we think about sport as being simply a reflection of American values, sport in the US that is that the way we want our sports to go? Is that what we want to drive our sports experiences? Is it the value systems that seem to be predominant in the United States? That would be a question for us to ask ourselves. So we're back to our question. Does sport build character? I've shown you some research that might help us understand this, but this is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Here's what I'd say. I'm going to say three things. First of all, I think if I'm pushed to give an answer, yes or no, I think yes is the answer. I think sport builds character. I think it impacts us morally. I mean, how could it not? That's the question I'm asking. It's a rhetorical question, but I think it's important. How could it not? Especially when we engage in it deeply. How could it not impact us? It's going to in some ways, right? I think it does. Second, yes, but that's not always a good thing. So I think we would have to say, if we ask if sport builds character, yes, if we understand character as being both full of virtues and full of vices, that there might be some vices that are bred through our participation in sport. And that would mean that sport builds character, but it might build bad character. And here's the third thing I want to say about this. Yes, and this is maybe the crucial part as we begin transitioning to talk about Christian faith. If sport is something that captures our hearts, it is going to form us in profound ways. And I think we need to think about how sport forms us and our levels of devotion, I suppose, to sport. So it is going to have an effect on us because everything that captures our hearts has an effect on us. This is what Calvin University philosopher Jamie Smith calls the liturgies of the ordinary. And he talks about shopping mall culture. Shopping malls, when they existed, were excellent at tugging on our heartstrings, making us think we needed things, driving our desires towards consumer culture, towards tangibility, towards materiality. So he says anything that captures our hearts has a formative effect on us. And I want to talk about that as we get into the Christianity aspect of all this. Okay, why should Christians care about sport and character? That's the question upon us right now. How can we look for it? How can we promote Christian character in sport? So I want to give a couple of contextual underpinnings, and then I want to get into some strategies, and then I hope we have time for some conversation. I plan on it. Here's the first thing. Sport, at its root, is play or playful. If there were sports in this world that were not ever or in any way playful, we wouldn't participate in them. Sports are not like eating, that you have to do it to survive. You don't have to play sports to survive. And so we only play those things that are playful to us. Playful meaning enjoyable, intrinsically valuable, satisfying. That's why we participate in sport. It's easier for us to see the ways in which sport can be part of a really good life and a life that is based on a strong Christian character if it's playful. It's easier to see this in a family 4th of July softball game or in a recreational basketball experience some evening, right? Maybe not, but maybe. It's harder to see it when sport is no longer at its root play. And it seems that a work ethic or a performance ethic, I'll talk about that in a minute, has become so much more pervasive, that sport isn't about just playing anymore. It's about performing. But if we think about sport as being playful, it's easy to see how that can be a very basic part of, a fundamental part of the human experience, and a very good one at that. We serve a God who has been described as playful in many different ways by many different authors. We, also homo ludens, the humans at play. This is part of who we are and how we're created to be. It seems to be important to us to remember, as we think about sport and Christian character, it seems important for us to remember the two greatest commandments: to love God and to love our neighbor. And it seems to me that if sport is a situation or a set of situations in which we aren't able to do that, then there's a problem with our engagement with sport in the first place. So where do we have opportunities in the world of sport to love God and to love our neighbors, and how do we do that? We'll talk about that with our strategies, but I wanted to make that point clear. We're talking about sport and Christian character. I also want to talk about a couple of theological principles: total depravity, the idea that if we're going to say that sport is a problem, sport presents problems for us in our character development, and sport is problematic for Christians to engage in, good luck finding any other things that are not filled with sin in some way or another. Again, thinking about what sport is at its root is a human endeavor. So of course there's going to be problems in the world of sport. Of course there's going to be sin. And Ordo Morris wants to think about how we order our loves, and that ought to identify for us whether sports fill a healthy place in our lives or not. A picture of Barry Bonds, and that's a tribute back to the bullet point that I showed you a few minutes ago about how many U.S. Olympic athletes would take a drug if it ensured winning but killed them within 5 years, Barry Bonds being someone that took performance-enhancing drugs throughout some of his career, and that got him into the record books. Mark mentioned my records. I did not take performance-enhancing drugs. It doesn't take that to get... Anyways, thinking about ordering our loves, thinking about what are our top priorities here. And in the world of sport, what is our priority? If winning's our number one priority, it's probably going to be a little bit harder to justify some of our actions, and I'm going to talk about what we can do instead, if I haven't already, related to the philosophy research that I shared. Another problem in the world of sport that we should be bothered by as Christians, and I'm reminded of this daily as we're preparing for the 4th Global Congress on Sport and Christianity this summer. So many of our presenters are going to talk about the problems of the performance ethic. No longer is there a play or participation ethic in the world of sport, really at any level. Certainly not at elite levels. And so many athletes, so many people in the world of sport are dealing with so many problems because of their performance-based identity, as opposed to an identity that's rooted in the core of their faith, for instance, or even in love of neighbor that's outside of the Christian perspective. So when we focus on winning and on our performance, we tend to allow particular behaviors that maybe are not helpful towards our forming good character. So let's talk about these 7 strategies that might be helpful. And when I say these, keep in mind that these are applicable in a number of different ways. These are applicable in the world of education, the world of sport, and I would say to one's Christian faith as well. So let me talk about these 7 a moment here. Here's the first one. It helps us to understand our character development if we focus on how we're being habituated. This gets at the liturgies for us. Think about the liturgy in worship. It's the things that you do over and over again, the habits that help to form who you are. And this oftentimes occurs at a subconscious level. You don't know you're being formed, but you are through the things that you're doing over and over again. Sport is such a great space to understand the ways in which we are formed through habitual practice. The things we do over and over again leads to tangible outcomes, oftentimes that we measure in the world of sport. There's a reason why we start every practice doing this particular drill. That reason why, Donna, we start with short court so often, right? Is that we're building up our skills, our racket control, our hand-eye, all those things in the world of tennis are helpful to us. We see this also in the ways that we live out Christian faith, for instance, that there will be particular Christian disciplines, reading the Bible, prayer, regular attendance at worship services, those types of things. As we do those things habitually, it leads to the formation of the individual that's participating in those things. This is a simple one, right? It's a simple one, and yet it's profound, right? Of course, we're formed by the things we do habitually over and over again, of course. And yet, the depth of understanding of what's going on is really what's crucial, because that's what we're missing. When I coached my daughter's JV basketball team this winter, we did the same drills to start every single practice. And you can imagine the complaints I received from the 15-year-old girls that were on my team. But I had to explain to them the depth of what we were doing. We're not just going through the motions. And every few days, when one of them was able to finally do something that she wasn't able to do even a few weeks prior, we pointed that out. Look at what this habit is getting for you. Look at how it's changing you. It's forming you for the better, in terms of the skills at least. We can reflect on our personal experiences. This is a little bit like going to the confession booth, I would say, at times. Something happens in the world of sport, and we want to reflect on it to avoid it happening again if it was a bad thing. Or we want to harness what it was that happened that was good so that it does happen again. The one particular player on my team who was prone to aggressive behavior on the floor led to fouls. Fouls are not a good thing in basketball, right? Especially for her, she was a good player. And so we reflected over and over again and came to the point to where she began understanding why and when she was going to do those things, and was able to avoid some of the overly aggressive behavior. It usually came from her own frustration, but we had to have talks about this. Hey, you just hurt one of your teammates in practice. Why did you do that? Well, she was beating me. Okay, so we're getting at a little bit of like where your heart is and what's frustrating you about all this, what's leading to that kind of behavior. And over time, it came to pass that she understood she would get frustrated and didn't know what she could do to beat that teammate or to get out of the sticky situation. And we eventually decided on, okay, if you feel that way, you need to ask me a question. Like, you need to raise your hand, you need to step out. And she got better at that over time. Came from reflection on personal experiences. She knew herself very well. I didn't, but I was coming to know her, and we came to an understanding and found a strategy for her to avoid flagrant fouls and even worse at times. Here's another one that seems really obvious, but is actually really profound. This gets at the question about coaches, doesn't it? Who are we putting in our kids' lives as examples for them in the world of sport? I don't think my wife and I are going to win any awards for being great sports parents, because we make mistakes like other parents do. But one of the things that we've tried to prioritize for our kids is having them be on teams, or be on teams with good coaches, or maybe more accurately, not having them be on teams where we thought there were coaches that we did not think were good influences on the kids. I think that's a really important thing. Who's the coach? Who's the one setting the moral climate for that particular team? Boy, it can be so important, can it? So important. And especially for athletes that are playing in teams that have systems, that have different groups at different age levels. We know from research, and we've known this for generations, that young kids, especially teenage kids, are most directly impacted by those 3 to 5 years older than them. It's a young life principle, isn't it, Jerry? This is why we ask so many college kids to be a part of Young Life Leadership, is because they have the influence in the high schoolers, 3 to 5 years older. So what are the cultures of our team programs like? And are those conducive to developing virtue? I can remember in one particular sport in the school I went to, when I was in middle school and my family and I were watching the varsity team play. You know, I was 3 to 5 years younger. And they saw a couple particular players on this team that when they would get subbed out, they'd take off their shirt and walk out shirtless. And I don't know if I've ever seen my dad more angry. I never seen my dad angry, but what is going on? You know, he clearly cared deeply. This is not good behavior. If this is going on in front of fans, what goes on during practice? Do I want my kids to be a part of a program that has that kind of culture to it? Who are the examples in sport that our kids are relying upon without even knowing it? You probably remember, like I do, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there's a series of Nike basketball shoe commercials in which Charles Barkley, who's now a commentator, said, "I am not a role model." He was a bad boy playing basketball, right? Prone to maybe less than virtuous behavior from time to time. But in selling his shoes, Nike promoted the fact that he was a bad boy, and he said, "I'm not a role model." And he was taken to task by a lot of people who said, why would you say that? Yes, you're a role model. Young kids look up to you. Of course they do. You're a pro. You're a hero. And his response was, that's not what I'm after. I'm saying I'm not a role model to parents. You set a good example for your kids. You decide whether your kids are watching, what they're watching and who they're watching and all of that. And I think we could go back and forth on the merits of what he said, but the point was, we all understand the value of examples in our lives. We can engage in some kind of dialogue that helps us increase literacy related to character. We don't do this enough in the world of sport, I would say. That is, point out particular times and actions when what an athlete did was either virtuous or vicious. We point out when they completed the skill well and when they didn't. At least that's what a lot of film sessions are. But what about, hey, you picked up an opponent after you knocked him down? That shows a great deal of love, maybe, as a virtue. Thank you for doing that. Hey, the referee made an incorrect call and we benefit as a team, but you knew that the ball actually went out of bounds off of you. And you told the ref, and they changed their mind, and it hurt us as a team. That was really not dumb, if that's what you're thinking. Courageous, maybe, right? So thinking about using some of the language of virtue sometimes helps us to understand what it is that we're talking about. We're giving good examples. This is a tough one for me at times because I think I'm always right. We can understand particular situations and the biases that we bring into those situations, knowing full well that morality and character isn't always a black and white field. Our understandings are very much formed by our own backgrounds, for better and for worse. And so if we head into situations where we might have different conceptions of what's morally appropriate and what's not, would lead to some disagreement. In fact, this is a big part of problems that we have when we have teams from different parts of the country, for instance, or from different countries playing against each other. Different ethical systems that we grew up in, different understandings. And so there are times when I need to act a little bit more humbly and try to understand, this is the empathy thing, trying to understand why it would be that a person that's doing something that I don't think is right is doing that particular thing. That's especially difficult for me right now as I watch games in which I care deeply about the outcome. I find myself having a hard time to empathize with referees, with officials, right? Maybe you do too. Maybe you're a better person than me though. Or the other team, or the other team's coach. Something like that. Anyways. I love this one. That's so simple, but there's also some depth to it as well. There have been research studies done that have proven that when students in a classroom are read a moral code about cheating being against that code, they are actually less likely to cheat on the test that immediately occurs after they are read that moral reminder. If you read the pledge from the school or the student handbook that says cheating is not allowed here right before they take a test, they're actually less likely to cheat. Think about the ways in which moral reminders play into the world of sport for us. This is Notre Dame football. All the players slap this "play like a champion today" sign. And while maybe not intuitively about morality, it's a reminder to them. I play for Notre Dame. I play for a championship program. And that might mean multiple things. I think they say it, champions of character, so to speak. A reminder for us to do the right thing. It's the WWJD bracelets that everybody wore for so long, right? It's a moral reminder for us. What would Jesus do? And then HWLF is, I think, what my daughter has now as a bracelet. He would love first, HWLF. A moral reminder. I love that she wants to wear that, whether she knows what's going on as a moral reminder or not. And the last one, the last of the 7 strategies, friendships of mutual accountability, setting up within our teams. And we have a number of Hope coaches that do such a good job of this, setting up legacy groups on their team, setting up leadership groups, setting up cohorts on their team that are based on mutual friendship and mutual accountability. And that's an important thing. You keep your peers accountable, knowing that we are incredibly formed by our peers as well. It's funny to me, I guess I should have chosen a different picture. It didn't occur to me until this morning. This is the Stompers. What kind of message are we sending to these young girls and the softball team that they're the Stompers? Anyways, thinking about friendships and the way in which friendships can edify who we are as people, and trying to leverage those relationships towards the good, the character of the team, can be really important and helpful. All right, so let me recap here what I think I've said. First, to answer our main question, yes, it appears likely that in some way sport builds character. And again, thinking about character broadly, because it might build bad character depending on the moral atmosphere in which the athlete is engaged. Sport forms us just like any other cultural institutions of which we are a part, for good and for bad. We talk about at Hope College the Hope experience as something that's formative for our students. We're not the only college that talks in that way. But of course, we're formed by the cultural institutions that we're a part of. Sport would be one of those. The context and the environment matters. And I think we ought to do a better job in the world of sport of managing who's in the particular context, who's in the environment in which we are stepping towards. Last, there are ways we can promote character, Christian character for that matter, in sport and in other institutions. That was those 7 strategies that I just suggested. And I love this picture. Hope students have such good character, right? The game against Calvin, this is an actual picture of Hope students. I hope both teams have fun. Isn't that what it's all about? Maybe not, but I love that picture and that sign. Do we have time for questions, Mark?
Yeah, I have to say that I begin first with a caveat. My wife was not happy that I wore this shirt today.
That makes two of us, at least. Right?
But I wore it because for me it begs a question. What happens when the sport is the religion? Because having lived in Columbus for 38 years, Ohio State football is the national religion of the state of Ohio. I mean, I just say that observationally.
Mm-hmm.
To follow that up with a question, nowhere in the research have I seen revenue affect character development.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I look at this through the lens of Ohio State football, where any single game, probably you have an economic impact of around $60 million. And we used to call them the big money boys, but those folks really hold sway over the coaching. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. Well, that's right. That's not a problem in Ann Arbor. Well, thanks, Steve. You're absolutely right. The context and the environment matters, and it's not hard to see why a performance ethic has been infused throughout sport at ever lower levels, but especially we see this at the college level, which we're seeing before our very eyes a change from an amateurism ideal to no longer having an amateurism ideal, which means these players are getting paid, which means they're professionals, which means they're not kids anymore, which means we need them to perform well. Who does? We're all complicit. We're all complicit. Now, am I going to stop watching Penn State football? Probably not, unfortunately. I'd like to think that I watch it with good character, but I also think that my kids learn their first swear word from watching Penn State football with me at some point in time. But this is a great question about the colossal nature of all of this, right? It's gotten out of our hands for sure, and our consumption seems insatiable. Yeah. What do I think of players at the collegiate level being paid? I think that there are injustices that are being corrected by this, but I'm not sure that we've identified a system that's appropriately healthy for these injustices to be rectified. And injustice, what I mean by injustice is the fact that there's big money that the coaches have received for a long time. There's not that the players have, but the players haven't even been given, let's be honest, at big schools, they're given a scholarship, but I'm not sure how valuable that is to them because of the demands on their time and the ways in which they're not even able to explore that free tuition that they're being given. Does this lead to the successful programs becoming even more successful because of the ability to take transfers more easily, more regularly with more money? I do think that there's a part of it that's happening. It seems like it's going to function maybe a little bit more like minor league baseball over time, where we have different levels and players can move from one level to the next. What's the justice of that rectifies? I think it allows players to capitalize as opposed to the schools on their money. And I think that's always been an injustice, but I also think we might be doing a bigger injustice when allowing this to happen, and that we're prioritizing sports above education, above a number of other things for us, right? And that's the injustice that I think we've missed as we've tried to correct for other smaller injustices.
Chad, first a compliment to you. This was excellent and very comprehensive, and you provided a lot of really outstanding insights. Thank you for that. The second question, or the question I actually have, is the proliferation of sports betting and how that's woven itself into the moral character of athletics. Comment?
Anytime that we're gambling on sports or playing fantasy football for that matter too, what we're doing is we're playing a game that's essentially a parasite on the sport itself, right? It's an extra thing on top of it. And I think what we're saying is we're no longer entertained by the game itself and watching and just hoping one team wins, that we have to we're putting money on it. That seems to be such a lure for us. And the problem is when we're prioritizing or thinking about the parasite, that becomes more important to us than the game itself that we had originally just enjoyed watching to be able to watch. So it certainly brings in more intense enthusiasm, but I think it's misdirected enthusiasm too. That's the other thing. We're again focused on the outcome as opposed to being able to understand the really valuable nuances of a well-played match. When all we want is to make sure that we see Jim Nantz one time during the national championship game because that's what we have $10,000 riding on, right? It totally exploits the entertainment and over prioritizes sort of the market forces of the sport. I think, let me add one more comment to that. I'm not a huge baseball person. I am a baseball person. I'm not a huge baseball person. One of the things that was really valuable to me growing up is watching Chicago Cubs games every day and starting to get a sense for the pitcher-batter duel, right? Really watching baseball and you understand one at bat for the batter, and next time he's up against the same pitcher, well, who's going to make a change and how's that going to impact the outcome of that at bat? Gambling is one thing among many that just pulls our interests away from some of those things that are so interesting and I think valuable about sports. Some of the strategies some of the intrinsically valuable practices that make these things worthwhile. And all of a sudden, we've allowed market forces to dictate so much of how we watch. I think that's really sad. Yeah, Jerry.
Two comments, or one comment and a question. First of all, your kindergarten teacher says hello,
Taught me everything I know, Dana did.
my wife. Secondly, Chad, I'm wondering if there have been any studies done that when we talk about character development, the impact from parents versus coaches, especially at those developmental stages, that elementary, middle school, high school, probably more so elementary, middle school levels. Who has more sway, the coach or the parent at that point? Any studies done with that?
Well, first of all, I mean, Mark and Jerry, thanks for, the way that you guys are helping to form Hope College students too. We have a great culture of people, and thank you guys for being a huge part of that. I don't know that there's been a study that's looked at the impact of coaching versus parenting, but I will say this, a sports psychology colleague of mine had some friends a few years ago who did a study in which somehow they got approval to put microphones in the cars of families whose kids had just played sporting events. Because one of the biggest problems, everyone talks about the car ride home. Kids are past it. They don't want to talk about the sport, but parents do. They want to talk about the performance of the kids. And what they found, even these families, these parents in these cars that knew they were being recorded, usually the first ride home when the recorder going, they didn't talk about the game afterwards, but they couldn't help themselves after that. Even knowing they're being recorded, they still had to talk about the game. Why did you do that, Johnny? Johnny, you made a mistake here. Yes, we cannot underestimate the importance of parents as well in all of this. We are children of God. That metaphor is used in the Christian faith for a reason, because of the influence that parents have in creating the children and their character, their formation in general. But when we focus on their performance, we show the inability to love them unconditionally in the ways that the Christian faith believes that the triune God loves his children unconditionally.
I have one. What about the impact of travel teams? When we start looking at grade school and high school, the travel team phenomena that in my day it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It just didn't have it, but I go back a few years, so.
I was at a volleyball tournament this weekend in Grand Rapids, and there were 32 courts in one of 15 sites, 32 courts at this one site, and all of them had at least 4 teams at them, playing for the weekend. And there were so many teams. But I remain convinced that the problem isn't that we have too many travel teams. The problem is we don't have enough good, by good I mean virtuous, travel team coaches. I think that's the problem. I think there's some good, to get at your question, Mark, there's some good in the fact that we're allowing kids who really love sports to be able to push themselves more than they did in previous generations by playing against better competition. The problem is that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that everybody thinks they're going to get to. And when we push our kids or allow them to make decisions as 12, 13-year-olds to travel multiple states every weekend to play against better competition, while that might be a short-term success for that kid who just loves and is obsessed by that sport and wants to get as good as they can, the problem is, what does that lead to? And what it doesn't lead to usually is a good, well-rounded life. And so how are we ordering our loves?
Okay, I lost my focus. What are you?
I'm talking too much. I'm so sorry.
No. I agree with what you're saying, but what are you doing in the classroom with Hope Kids?
Yep, good question. Good question. The big thing that we're doing right now is helping to get our faculty thinking in terms of virtue literacy. So we gave a survey to Hope faculty at a meeting back in January and said, here are some strategies for character education. Do you do these things? They're totally anonymous. Do you do these things or not? We're not judging or anything like that. Do you do them? And by and large, the majority of them indicated we do these things, but we don't even see this as being character education. We just see it as good teaching. And so I think there's a carryover between teaching content well and teaching character. for us. And so what we're trying to do is help our faculty identify, this is just like I talked about as one of the other strategies, we're helping them identify when what they're doing is actually forming the student's character and how that might be a really helpful thing for them. So that's the first answer. The second answer is we're offering some small stipends for faculty over the next 2 years to bring more obvious character development modules into their classes and trying to get that across the curriculum, in the general education curriculum and in all of our programs as well. So that's what we're working on. If you have helpful thoughts, I would love to hear those. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and we're absolutely, yes.
As a parent, and having a kid who played travel hockey and knowing both coaches as well as parent impact. So when our son came to Hope, and do you do this with kids today, do a character assessment to see if it's a good fit? Because certainly there are parents and kids, based on their upbringing and their conversations in the cars, that would not ascribe to what you're talking about, the development of the whole person. And it's fascinating to me to think about. I think of Tom Izzo, and I think of some of the virtues and the morals that he seems to stand for. And maybe that's with NIL. You're going to see more disparity fall out.
Yeah.
So,
No, thanks for the question. We're doing a couple of things and we're not doing other things, but I would say within our athletic department, we're doing a really nice job of giving students some workshop opportunities to grow as leaders and grow in their character every year. So there's a program set for first year students and then second year and third and fourth, and we're building those out. Our athletic department is. We're also beginning to sort of assess the character of our students in general on campus, all students on campus. And so we're beginning to offer surveys that will help us identify where they believe or what their perceptions are related to their character and that of the Hope College community. So we're working towards that. It's part of my role with the Character Hub, is to build some of those things in. Sure, let me offer one more thought to this, then that would be great. We had one of the associate athletic directors at the University of Michigan come to campus this fall, and actually he talked about one thing that they're doing that actually speaks to fit. So they're working with every incoming student athlete to try to understand the values that they stand for. They've also done this with coaches to help them understand what values the coaches want their programs to stand for. So then you can get into a situation where there might be fit or lack of fit. And really the hope is that all of this moves more towards a focus on valuing relationships. That seems to be above all else the number one thing. So there is something that they're doing that's really interesting. And I don't know that I explained it perfectly well, but more and more athletic programs are thinking about that. What culture are we creating and how important that is in terms of the development of the student athletes and their love for each other and for the program. Okay, online question.
Online question. Are traveling sports teams creating an elitist sports culture?
Yes. And
Simple answer.
I'll say more. Yes, it is. I think that's problematic in a lot of ways. I also am going to be honest with you. Maybe this is me being a red-blooded American. I love when we strive for excellence. I love when we try to get better. I love when we have athletes who push the boundaries of what's possible. I think that's all really, that can be really positive. I also think that there's a lot of collateral damage to that. I think it was part of what I offered in the answer to Mark's question as well, that in our quest for creating the next super athlete, what we're doing is leaving out kids that shouldn't be left out at certain ages, at so many different ages. I think about, I think about my own son who will be late to the maturation, the physical maturation, and where he will be left out at some point in time. And so when we talk about NIL and the transfer portal, maybe one of the small positives is that you get a kid that might be overlooked out of high school who might have an opportunity to get to a higher level now because of the transience that's available to them. Again, that's maybe one positive in the midst of a whole lot of negatives. But I do think we're creating an elite model. I think that's problematic, even if there are some positives to that. But it comes back to the question, what is our goal especially in youth sports, when we talk about travel teams, what is the goal of youth sport participation, of travel sport participation? What is the goal? And I don't think many parents, or coaches for that matter, would be able to give an answer that we could hold up to ethical scrutiny.
More. What counsel would you give parents whose personal identity is wrapped up in the athletic performance of their child?
That doesn't happen, does it?
You're looking at one.
And you're looking at another. Yes, this is why Calvin University philosopher Jamie Smith is so helpful to me. I have to guard my heart every time I enter into an athletic arena. And I have to remind myself that I'm a child of God, that I am loved by God no matter how my child performs. And it makes the experience a whole lot better for me when my identity isn't riding on their own performance. But that happens, and it happens a whole lot. Part of it is guarding our hearts. And part of it is, I think, remembering what the goals are. What are the goals? Is the goal for my kid to be the best every single time? They're not going to be, because you, the parent, weren't either. No matter how good I think I was in my past, I know that I wasn't as good as I think I am, right? That they're kids. They're our kids. And even, and they do childish things. That happens in sports and outside of sports. So I would say, guard your heart. Guard your heart. Remember whose you are before you enter into the arena as a parent of an athlete. The question is about grandparents and pressures on kids. And I agree. And I think there's a lot of times that grandparents, say things, and it's meant, it's meant in love, and they should be quiet. Yes. And that's the same for parents, and it's the same for all spectators. We should be quiet. We should have more youth sports where parents and grandparents aren't even there. We should be outside playing our own pickleball or doing whatever else. Let the kids play without the pressures of us being around there. Youth sport would be better. Travel sport would be better.
All right. Thank you, Chad. Excellent
Thank you.
presentation.